Hi everyone, welcome back to our channel. Bex here today to do another book adaptation video. Yes, I did just upload one about Prince Caspian, but I've had another one in the works for a while. This one is book to series, and I want to talk about Dopesick, Dealers, Doctors, and the Drug Company That Addicted America by Beth Macy. This book was published in 2018 and it's an in-depth look at the opioid epidemic in America. This particular book has a focus in Virginia because that's where the author's from. And in terms of what it's really going to cover, you get that in the subtitle. Dealers, it focuses on the drug dealers and the drug dealing network. Doctors talks about the doctors trying to help those who have become addicted, community members as well, helping those in need. And then the drug company that addicted America is referring to Purdue Pharma, which is tied in with the Sackler family, and that may ring a few bells for you. So this book talks about all of those things, but in a bit of an unequal amount. I'd say this book spends about 2/3 of the time talking about victims, their families, doctors, other community members, helping them, and also community initiatives that have been created to make up for a medical and judicial system that just doesn't want to work together and is really slow to adapt to new research. And then I'd say the other third of the book talks about the Sacklers in relation to Purdue Pharma, and then also a mid-2000s US federal court case that was taking place involving Purdue Pharma. So you really have two sides of the same coin covered in this book. Because of the scope of this book, there are a lot of names, and I definitely had trouble keeping everybody straight, particularly the families that have been affected by the epidemic, and then also those who were involved with the federal court case. The book also does jump in the timeline a fair amount. That wasn't as confusing to me as it was trying to keep track of who everybody was, but there were times where I did have to pause and look back and try to remember where we were in the grand scheme of things, like how aware was the rest of the world that this was going on at this point in the book, things like that. So that made it a little more difficult to follow. That being said, there was one particular story about somebody who was suffering from opioid use disorder, Tess, and her story in the book was really moving. Every time it came up, I knew exactly who we were talking about, and it became evident as the book went on that the reason we were getting so much about Tess and really getting her story was because Beth actually met her, and there was definitely more of a relationship and a connection there. So I was very curious to see if this story was going to be adapted into the show or not. When I finished the book, I did end up giving it 3 stars. I did find that it was confusing at times with the timeline jumping and just the amount of people, and there were certain points where I found her word usage, sentence structure a bit confusing, a bit odd, but at the same time I really liked getting the human interest stories, the people who've really been affected by OxyContin, the Sackler family, Purdue Pharma, and so it has stuck with me. I just wish the execution had been a little bit better, and therefore I was hoping when we got to the show that it would improve upon some of the things that I didn't like as much about the book. The show, which is also called Dopesick, was released in late 2021 as an 8-episode mini-series. It was originally released on Hulu, but I live in Canada, Hulu does not exist here, so I watched it on Disney+, and it stars a number of different people. Just like the book, there is a very wide scope here, so there are a lot of actors. So there's probably one, if not multiple people in this show that you have heard of. Before we get into how the show actually compares to the book on its own, I do think it was very well made. The script, the acting, the production, cinematography, everything was top notch. Even if I hadn't read the book and I went in to watch the show, I would have been very happy with what I saw. The show, like the book, does jump around a lot in the timeline. At least with the show, they have the dates going by on the screen, so it's a little bit easier to follow because you have the visual as well. And then there are a lot of people too. At least with the show, you have the visual of the face to try to tie to the name, but it still does take a little bit to figure out who everybody is. It's something that when the first episode is done, you may feel a bit lost, just like you may feel a bit lost with the book, but give it time, you will start to recognize everybody, just as I usually did in the book. At the end of each episode of the show, during the credits, it would say that the show is based upon the book by Beth Macy. And I will say that sometimes I felt like it should say the show was inspired by the book, only because the show covers so much more. First thing being the Sacklers and Purdue Pharma. There is way more time spent on the family and their inner dynamics, as well as what's going on in the offices of Purdue Pharma, and the book really doesn't touch on that in anywhere to the same amount of depth. If you have read the book Empire of Pain by Patrick Radden Keefe, you will maybe see some similarities here. I mean, you will see some similarities because it's talking about the same thing that did happen. The show may have some artistic liberties on it, but I really felt like what I was seeing with the Sackler Purdue Pharma side of the show was really what I got when reading Empire of Pain, which is a book that specifically talks about the Sackler family. They also had a much heavier focus on the mid-2000s federal court case, focusing on Brownlee, Mountcastle, and Ramsayer. The three of them, I felt like I got to know them a lot more in the show, and of course I don't know exactly how accurate those portrayals are, but we hear about them in the book, we hear about the court case, but that is a huge part of the show, something that really kind of draws everything together. And although I appreciated it in the show, it is a pretty large change from the book. The show, like the book, does also focus a lot on the people in these coal mining communities living more rural life who have been greatly affected by OxyContin. 90% of the people are fictionalized, but they take details from the book and apply them to the show. Things like pharmacies being robbed for OxyContin pills, addiction spirals, people dealing with dope sickness, actual drug dealers standing outside Narcotics Anonymous meetings selling drugs to those who are trying to recover. All of those things are talked about in the book and they're reflected in the show. Related to that, I will say that the book does have a lot more individual stories in it, whereas the show decides to focus on a couple people, which makes sense. But there are still a lot of details from particular stories of people going to rehab and sort of the different rehab facilities that you may have access to. The kind of fight with the system with methadone and Suboxone and what that means for people who are trying to recover, whether or not they'll ever actually get off that medication fully and kind of move on with their lives. That whole discussion is covered in the book as well as the show, and I appreciated that the show was able to dive into that with just a couple people and helped us kind of focus our attention. The show also has a major plot line that involves the doctor, Samuel Phoenix, who's played by Michael Keaton, and the Purdue Pharma sales rep, Billy, who's played by Will Poulter. And this is once again specifically fictionalized for the show, but it is based on a lot of details that we know exist, some of which are covered in the book. And you get to see how Purdue Pharma was creating these incentivizing trips to get their drug reps to sell more. You can also see how the reps were schmoozing the doctors and were giving them what they also believed to be real information, but was actually semi-falsified, and then giving that to the doctors to get them to sell more OxyContin. I really enjoyed seeing that storyline in the show as well. Towards the end of the show, we start to see more of the community initiative side of the story being built up. We actually have a couple people who are real people who are talked about a lot in the book show up in the show. They're played by actors, but we see some names that we recognize, a doctor and a nun who are very involved with the community efforts and are covered a lot in the story, make an appearance in the show, especially in the last 2 episodes or so. So I was happy to see that they did tie that in because I was wondering if they were really even going to touch on the community initiatives, because they were spending so much time not only on the Sacklers, Purdue Pharma, the U.S. Federal court case, but also because they created this entirely new focus that was not touched on in the book, and that involved a DEA agent played by Rosario Dawson. So in the book, as I mentioned, they do have a fair amount about the drug dealers. There's actual interviews with them, the drug dealing network, and more local law enforcement. The show decided to kind of leave that out of it seems, and focus more on this DEA agent storyline, which does have factual things in it. It's not completely made up, but there is no DEA character that is focused on in the book. And I think they may have created that to sort of draw more of the storylines together and create more connections, which would have been harder to do if they were focusing more with like the local law enforcement. It is a good storyline. They definitely focus on it more towards the end of the show, like it kind of builds up in a very dramatic fashion. But that is just interesting to note that that is something that they added in there that really wasn't covered all in Dopesick. And I think it did work though. It worked for the show for sure. The last thing I'll say about the show is that it is 3 years newer than the book, so they were able to add some extra things into it and give us a bit more of a where we are today, a bit more of a conclusion than the book maybe was able to, and I appreciated that. Whether you decide to read the book or watch the show, there are certain things you will feel and experience no matter which one you choose. Both will make you feel angry at the Sackler families and Purdue Pharma. Both will make you feel sad and angry at what happened to these people when they were put on a drug that was supposed to be helping them. Both of them will help you understand how we landed in this opioid epidemic, and both of them will give you a lot of information to work with, though you do have to account for some artistic liberties in the show. I would recommend reading the book Dopesick if you're looking for the human interest side of things, the community initiatives, just because you get a lot more of that in the book than you do in the show. As a side note, for another recommendation for reading, if you really want the nitty-gritty on the Sackler family and Purdue Pharma, I would recommend reading Empire of Pain by Patrick Radden Keefe. And if you are looking for the overarching story and really being able to get an in-depth look at a lot of different things, I would recommend the show. The show is just really able to tie everything together and dive deep into particular things because it has 8+ hours to work with versus a 300-page book. That's it. That's all I have to say. If you have read Dopesick or watched the show or done both, let me know what you thought of them in the comments below. As always, all of our links are in the down bar. You can go check those out if you feel so inclined. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you later.